Welcome to another episode of Pit Lane Parlay.
And welcome to another episode of Pit Lane Parlay. This is Matt Hickey with host Mike. How's it going?
Just lovely. The Eagles didn't play today, so it makes me happier when my Sundays aren't so miserable.
Yeah. Just had the night off. PTO or something. She gets a lot more PTO acceptances than I do. Kind of bitter.
Yeah, well, you can take that up with HR, which I think is also Jess, so you might be out of luck on that one.
Well, whatever. All right. Honestly, there's not too much to talk about tonight as far as news. James Davison apparently has a deal with Rick Ware Racing for the Indy 500.
He finished 21st in the NASCAR race today, which is pretty good for a Rick Ware car. So,
yeah. William Story listened to our last podcast, the F1 side about Rich Energy.
And by the time you're listening to this, we may have already done an interview with him.
Maybe, maybe not. And if you know the rest of that quote, then congrats on seeing The Departed.
Hinchcliffe,
anything else?
Capstone sponsorship for the other non-Genesis races. I couldn't remember what his name was. And I guess real quick before we dive into the heart of what we're talking about, we should say our thoughts and well wishes for Bob Jenkins, who is battling brain cancer. It's really sad to see and came out of nowhere. And hopefully he's okay, is able to recover quickly. I know he's about to go through chemo and everything like that. So our thoughts are with him. Definitely love hearing his voice at the track every May, and hopefully he'll be able to be there a little bit this year.
Yes, we wish him the best. Legendary voice for sure within the racing community. Apparently, Indycar is doing another virtual iRacing season. Cannot be excited about that, to be honest.
Nope. Don't care.
Sato's got the same sponsor again for the Indy 500 with a new look. Fittipaldi's the Haas reserve driver, so nothing in IndyCar yet. Looks like that's kind of it.
Props to
F1 maybe to Indianapolis, which is kind of somewhat IndyCar related. Yeah, that's kind of it. That's the only news we got to work with this week. So we are gonna discuss kind of two items here. One is kind of an inverse of the other. So the first item is IndyCar.com, and Curt Cavin released an article this week talking about 5 drivers who shifted from F1 to IndyCar and were successful in their endeavors. The 5 that he listed specifically in the article, and this is kind of on the back of Raymond Grosjean coming over and seeing if he can add his name to this list. So the 5 on there are Emerson Fittipaldi, Nigel Mansell, Alex Zanardi, Takuma Sato, and Eddie Cheever. And my initial reaction to this was it's a good list. Everybody on there has either won an Indy 500 or won a championship. In the case of Fittipaldi, he did both. So definitely some, glittering accolades for all 5 of them. Stephen Wilson on Twitter replied to the article stating that, obviously he was hoping that Justin Wilson would be on there, and that kind of started a discussion of sorts. And not only is there Justin Wilson, there's plenty of others who have gone to Formula One and then come over to IndyCar and have found success that weren't on that list. Kind of active right now, Alexander Rossi kind of floats to the top of that discussion as well. I know he's only coming up on year 5 or 2016, so this would be year 6 now.
Man,
it's crazy. So, obviously there's others that could definitely be on this list. So kind of first, your thoughts on the 5 that were selected, and second, if you have any comments on what Stefan had to say.
So I don't have a problem with the list itself. I think all 5, like you mentioned, 500 winners or championship winners or both. I did wish they had mentioned, even if it was like an honorable mention for Justin Wilson, because I get kind of what I think some people, and you might have been one of them, were saying on Twitter, like he didn't win a championship or a 500, but he was such a big part of the sport for so many years that I would have liked to see him mentioned. And along those same lines, you could have, hey, Alex Rossi won a 500. I know some of the other F1 converts haven't done so well, like Max Chilton, but Max did lead 40 laps at the Indy 500 5 years ago. So,
There you go.
and Pietro Fittipaldi did some IndyCar races and might do some more this year. Who knows? But yeah, that would be my only thing is I just wish, I know this is all about the past, but there's so many guys who are a little bit more current, like Rossi. I think Rossi could have easily been on this list. I don't know who I would necessarily put him over per se, but yeah, something to talk about a little bit more what's currently going on in IndyCar than just what happened, because this article's cool, but it's not going to do anything to drive people to watch more IndyCar or more F1 unless they're already watching it.
Yeah, I think the list is the only one I would go, I don't know about that one, would be Cheever. Yes, he did win the Indy 500. For the longest time, he was the only American in the Formula One world. So, he was trying to carry the country on his back over there, and then came over to IndyCar. Mixed results until he really kind of got to IRL. And then once he got to IRL, where it was a little bit weaker, he did really well, did a good job of, starting his own team and whatnot before it eventually had to shut their doors. But yes, I would replace Cheever with Rossi for sure. And I think as Rossi's resume continues to grow, it's going to just strengthen his case. And then as far as the Justin Wilson one, yeah, I think an honorable mention may have been warranted, but I would not have included him within my top 5. I think his biggest strength for sure was definitely outpacing the poor equipment that he had access to. But as far as just like the black and white view of it with the accolades, he just, didn't have the Indy 500, didn't have a championship. Only had a couple really strong championship efforts. And I guess for including Champ Car, he was Bourdais' biggest rival for the longest time. So it's kind of a mixed bag because I see where Stefan's coming from, but at the end of the day, I think not too many faults with that specific list. And I don't know, what is your take on guys like Joseph Newgarden or Will Power or even Charlie Kimball, where they try to get through that European ladder to Formula One, it doesn't work, and then they come over to either the road to Indy or IndyCar? Do we count them as, quote unquote F1 rejects?
No, I think if you're going to be an F1 reject or an F1 convert, you should at least have a test or a reserve driver role or done a test session or something like that. Newgarden tried. I don't honestly, without looking.
Power did.
Yeah, Power did. But I still wouldn't call him an F1 reject. Like Graham Rahal had an F1 test, but it was more for show than.
Yeah, that one was the show one.
So I don't think there's like I guess kind of more, the more I think about it, there's not really a concrete line that you can say is or isn't a reject. Like Newgarden, I wouldn't consider so much because I don't think he made it even to F3. Like
I think he was GP3.
Okay, so he was GP3.
Was that old F3?
Yeah. So not really.
Yeah, I think I differ with you on that one a little bit, and I think some of those who are like clearly on the intent to get to Formula One, I mean, I wouldn't say they were like an F1 reject like Max Chilton or Marcus Ericsson, but I definitely still think their ambitions were clear with the paths they were taking, and then when it doesn't work, they just come to IndyCar, and because of that, we're talking Joseph Newgarden, Will Power. I guess I unfortunately don't know off the top of my head in front of me as far as like, Simon Padgett, Scott Dixon, if that was them. Who else? Kimball, like I said, Chilton, Connor Daley is kind of a inverse one. Went road to Indy to the European ladder, back to Indycar, and then even in between, he did some F2 too. He's kind of everywhere for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's more of a F1 reject. Sorry, Connor. Than like you could make a definite case for that. Dixon, I think, was hurt by the fact, from what I remember, his test session with Williams was pretty bad, which is really crazy to think about, that Scott Dixon did something poorly.
Yeah, and then Daley had the Force India test because he won the Pro Mazda championship or something along those lines. Yeah.
Ryan Briscoe tested F1. He was in Toyota's young driver program.
Bourdais came from, I think, Formula 3000 to Champ Car. And Formula 3000 used to be like the GP2 before GP2.
Would you count Bourdais as an F1 reject or an IndyCar guy that went to F1 because, like you said, he did, Formula 3000 or whatever it was, then came over here, then went over there, and wasn't bad in F1. Obviously, wasn't that great, but where would you put him on our hypothetical category list here?
I think I would be the next topic, the one we get to next.
Okay.
I don't think he would be an F1 reject. Yeah. I get what the logic is there, but he was a 4-time IndyCar champion when he went to Formula One, and yeah, I mean, I just watched those seasons that he was in, and it's a bit of a, him getting fired was a bit of a head scratcher. No, he didn't have the glamorous results, and he wasn't the best driver out there, but he was definitely better than his rookie teammate Sebastian Vettel, up to the point where he got fired.
Yep.
And obviously Bourdais can wear his heart on his sleeve, and I think sometimes he can be quite emotional, and I bet money that behind the scenes maybe things were a little terse with his leadership team that he had to report to. So I can imagine maybe that's one of the reasons they kind of just wanted to dump him. They also had Jaime Alguersuari, who was kind of waiting in the wings to step up, and I think they may want to give a young driver a chance to have a shot. So, but ultimately, the big one that stood out to me with Bourdais, the two big ones, is his first race in Australia in 2008. He was doing great. He had a great race going. There was a couple accidents throughout the race, so he inherited some positions based off that. But with I think it was 4 laps to go, the guy's running 6th or something, which would have been a great result. And I think he had a engine failure. That's man, that really sucks. That was his first race, looking great. And then the second one obviously was Sebastian Vettel leading every single lap at Monza, or all but 2 laps at Monza, and winning a historic race for himself and Toro Rosso. And, one of the things that was lost in that was that Bourdais started 3rd that race, and his car basically died on the grid. And so by the time they got it figured out, he was a lap or 2 behind, and he was running the same lap times as Vettel that whole race. But obviously, since he started 2 laps down, he finished the 15th or something. And I just man, imagine if that had gone his way and he finished on the podium.
Even tough.
I don't want to keep, and I don't want to keep ranting. Spa, last lap, he's running 3rd. The team doesn't call him in for wet tires, and a guy like Alonso, who started the lap 23 seconds behind him, ends up passing him with 100 feet left to take 3rd. It's I just think Bourdais kind of got a rough shot at that. Sorry, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think Bourdais' shot in Formula One isn't as bad as people make it out to be, and I genuinely think he got kind of Red Bulled pretty bad, because Red Bull has the way of steamrolling some people.
No.
And I think he was one of them for sure, which is quite unfortunate.
You know who hopes they steamroll Red Bull this year? Our pal William Story. Anyway,
hey, I do appreciate the fact that he took the time to listen to our last episode, though. Even if we weren't the most positive of reviewers.
I am very curious to see how this week will go if he dials in, but we will save that for another day. Real quick, there are some guys who did do the opposite, the Indycar to F1 switch. But I wanted to just gloss over a couple names of guys who tested, but obviously never got in a race. You know, Townsend Bell tested for Jaguar in 2003. That one.
Everybody tested for Jaguar.
Yeah,
it was unreal.
Let's see here. Who else? Mike Conway tested for Braun. I think that would have been really cool to see Mike Conway get an F1 shot because he was such a good road course racer and still in WEC. Dario, Jaguar.
Yeah.
J.R. Hildebrand. That one I don't remember at all.
Force India.
TK tested for Honda in 2005. Let's see here. Will Power, like you mentioned. I'm trying to scroll through this list. Another Jaguar, Schechter.
Marco, Honda.
I'm not even worried about that one. Anyway, let's go through the heart of this list here. We don't need to take a ton of time, but I found some interesting names here, and shout out to our pal Frenchie Michael Goodyear who helped me find a couple of these names. Fabrizio Barbaza.
Yeah.
I had to check that one to make sure I was pronouncing it right.
Uh-huh.
Indy 500 Rookie of the Year. Kart Rookie of the Year. And a great year in 1987. He was the Indy Lights champ in 1986. His F1 stats, however, not quite as good. I think he made it 16 races, two total championship points. He had an entire year where he did not qualify, I think, in every race he attempted to. Had 2 sixth-place finishes in 1993, 2 years later, and that was it. So he had terrible F1 luck. But I always thought that was funny to mention his name in the IndyCar to F1 spectrum.
F1, and this could be another rant we do someday. Maybe we can talk about it on the F1 side. To try to keep that short, the thing with F1 that people have to understand is that in IndyCar, I mean, obviously Team Penske is going to be good, and expectations are going to be higher for Team Penske and Chip Ganassi because they have more money and effort to spend on their equipment. But at the end of the day, IndyCar really is more about the driver, and the driver can make a lot of impactful decisions to raise their level in the championship. And in Formula One, it is really a team sport, and they hire 2 people to basically not screw up. That's their whole job. Is there's 2 people within the organization who get to put in, or basically get to take all the efforts of everybody behind the scenes and take it out on the track and not screw up. And obviously that's the drivers. And so that's kind of, at the end of the day, it's a team sport, and, doesn't matter how good of a driver you are. If you get into a car that's trash, you can only do so much. And so for poor Fabrizio here, AGS was terrible. I think they made 2 races that whole season between both drivers. And this is in the day where he had to do pre-qualifying and whatnot because the grid sizes were so big. And then his other team was Minardi. And for those who don't know, Minardi was terrible for all but maybe one season in their whole existence. So I give it an incomplete. I don't really know what he could actually accomplish based on just the limited sample size of just nonsense teams they had to run with. If I remember correctly, he was pretty decent. I think he was a road course racer in IndyCar with Patrick.
I'd have to look, but I think you're right.
So if I remember correctly, he was pretty decent in IndyCar. He had a couple decent results, and then went to Formula One because it's quote unquote better. And I think a kind of a common theme we're going to see here is that if you're going to do this jump to Formula One, make sure you land in good equipment. Because if you're just going to go with AGS and Minardi, you're just unfortunately going to be wasting your time.
So his kart results, he had a podium at Indy in his rookie season in 87, had 4 other top 10 finishes in 3 years. Otherwise, not really a shining.
Yeah, and I'm not going to try to speculate too much without knowing in front of me here, but I'm guessing in 87 there's probably a lot of attrition.
Let's see. Well, since we're here, finish. A lot.
That's usually how those worked back in the day. It was almost about more surviving than it was racing.
If I'm now I'm just looking at this box score on Wikipedia, so take this with a grain of salt. If I'm understanding this correctly, only Al Unser and Roberto Guerrero finished on the lead lap. So podium, our boy Fabrizio finished a lap down in third place, and essentially everybody starting with Mario Andretti, who finished ninth, didn't finish the race. So only 8 guys finished, it looks like.
Oh God, was that the year that Mario led like 160 something laps and didn't? That one hurt. That one hurt to watch. When I rewatched that, I was like, oh, the poor guy.
Yeah, I think it. Yeah, he led 170 of the first 177 laps, and then didn't finish the race with a broken valve spring.
Poor guy.
Yeah, only 8 guys finished the race.
Good God.
Derek Daley was also in that race.
Anyways, so Fabrizio's podium gets an asterisk.
Big asterisk.
Let's see, Danny Sullivan, he's on there. Let's see what his F1 results were.
Yeah, he did 2 kart races before he went over to F1. I don't know. So we're going off of old stats here. His Formula One record on F1.fandom.com has 15 starts, no poles, no wins, no podiums, no fastest lap, and 2 points. He was with Tyrrell in 1983, and it looks like it was just that 1 year.
Yeah, I'm trying to get in here and see who was teammate at Tyrrell that year. Oh, Michele Alboreto.
And just to go deeper, since I have it in front of me here now.
Oh, Alboreto won a race that year. Dang it, Danny.
Whoops.
He won at Detroit.
So Danny Sullivan had an 8th in Long Beach when F1 ran at Long Beach. He had a 5th in Montreal. He also, for reasons that I am not going to dive into now, had a disqualification in Canada that summer, and then also had a 7th place in the South African Grand Prix, which doesn't strike me as particularly memorable at all. Anyway, anything else?
Just got one season. I mean, without diving too deep into it, it looks like his teammate kind of got the better of him for the most part. So yeah, I mean, it's also kind of hard because he only did a couple races in Indycar before moving, so it's not like we had a whole lot to go off on this side too. And obviously he came back and was phenomenal. So I think at the end of the day, it worked out in his favor.
He definitely made the right choice.
Michael Andretti.
Yeah, Michael Andretti, obviously probably the most notable on this list because there's so much written about his F1 stuff. I'm going to ask you one question before, and I'm just going to turn it over to you for your thoughts on this because I haven't watched the old 90s season when he was with McLaren in probably since it was 1992. He actually originally, if this racer article is correct, actually this article only came out last year. He signed a contract with Ferrari at first, and somehow it fell apart, and then obviously had the McLaren deal. So things kind of fell apart at Ferrari. Shocking, I know. It seems like it's been going on forever there. But do you think he would have had... I know the 93 Ferrari, I don't think was all that great, but do you think he would have had any better luck at Ferrari than he did McLaren, or maybe not?
Yeah, let me refresh my memory here on Ferrari. No, not that year. No, I think Ferrari was a bit of a career killer at this point in time. I feel really bad because John Alesi also, if we're speaking of Tyrrell, had a really, really good season with Tyrrell and was looking like, the next, great driver of the series, and then moves to Ferrari, and the poor guy was there for, I don't know, 6 years or something and never won a race. I don't think. I don't think he won a race with Ferrari. He did get one win later on though in Montreal. Thankfully, after years of futility, he finally did win a race. But Sorry, he did win. That Montreal win was with Ferrari. Beg your pardon. But yeah, so if he had gone to Ferrari in '93, I think it would have been the same result, unfortunately. And I think the one positive of going to Ferrari instead of McLaren is that if he went to Ferrari, he wouldn't have been teammates with Ayrton Senna. And it's insane to think that anybody, let alone a guy who has not had the time to get up to speed in a Formula One car, is going to jump into a seat next to Ayrton Senna, the greatest driver in the history of everything, and try to beat him. It's just not going to happen. So for Michael, it was the experience. It was all the electronic driver aids on the cars in this era, which went away in 1994. So, well, I mean, they were legally supposed to go away, but Benetton, I think, used them in 1994. So, I mean, he has to come over and has to get used to the active suspension, the gearbox, et cetera, and it's probably nothing like he had ever raced in his life. He couldn't finish right away. Like, he kept crashing out within the first lap of, I think, 3 of the first 4 races or something like that. So even his track time in the race, he couldn't get anything going. There's a lot to this. So I think to keep it short, it's in no way, I think, a reflection on him as a driver. I am almost willing to say that I think the real person at fault here is Ron Dennis. I don't know why Ron Dennis hired him, and I don't know why Ron Dennis would fire him after. I don't know if they mutually parted ways or if he got fired officially, the official word, after his one and only podium at Monza. Because that year they had Mika Hakkinen waiting in the wings, and they loved him. They were so excited to get him up to McLaren in the big team, other than just the reserved role. And so why you go out and hire Michael Andretti when you got Mika Hakkinen waiting in the wings and you're super impressed by him because Mika Hakkinen finished the season? I just kind of don't understand what they were doing that year. So there's a lot about this one. This could be a whole episode, really. But I think at the end of the day, yes, if I was Michael, it's probably bad timing to go over to Formula One. I'm glad he did it just to say that he could do it, but it's kind of one of those on his legacy. It's something that people look back on and kind of question, which I think is unfair because he is a phenomenal driver.
Yeah, kind of two things. Ron Dennis definitely screwed up. Also, he screwed up that was right after Honda had left McLaren, and then they had to pretty much use hand-me-down Cosworth engines next year that were down on power significantly from whatever other team was running Cosworth that year. That's escaping my memory right now. And then looking at this Road and Track article, there was actually a rule in F1. I don't know if it was just for 1993. There was a rule instituted that in every practice session, you could only run a maximum of 23 laps, and that was counting the in and out laps. So instead of running, 40, 45 practice laps, 50 laps, however many you get in an hour and a half session or however long they were back then, you do 23 laps and that's it. So definitely doesn't help somebody who's learning all of this new technology in an F1 car, like you mentioned. So I'll just leave it at that. I didn't really think about that at all until I just read it again. Another one that I find kind of interesting is Cristiano De Mada. He had kart for the late 90s and early 2000s. Had a couple wins. I don't think he won a championship
Nope, 2002.
Yeah, thank you. Then went over to F1 for 2003 and 2004 after his championship and had a few points finishes. Nothing, fantastic, but just like our buddy Fred Alonso was talking crap about the Toyota engines and got fired right after the German Grand Prix that year and went back to kart, obviously, in 2005. So I don't remember the full story about that. He had a good run in kart, then went over to F1, did okay, had 4 top 10 finishes in 28 total races, only 13 total points though. And obviously when he came back to IndyCar, just wasn't as strong, but he was running for Dale Coyne racing one of those years. So sorry, Dale. He's probably not going to be a championship contender in that car. And then he ran for Rousport, and I don't even remember that team at all.
Rousport was the bomb. That's who Wilson ran for most of those years.
I should say I don't remember anything about them other than the name Rousport. So do you think, and you might have watched these races somewhat more recently than I have, so he gets fired after German Grand Prix in 2004 for reportedly saying how crappy the Toyota engines were. Did he have any future in F1, or was he just kind of middling and was probably destined to leave anyway?
Yeah, we're getting so many like future episodes that we could do after this episode. I'm getting all these ideas in my head because doing one about Toyota, I think, would be worthwhile. Oh my God, what a cluster! It's really hard to say what Toyota was or was not going to do with him, because what ended up happening is, obviously he got fired. Ricardo Zonta, who was the test driver, took over for most of the races, but Jarno Trulli came in for two of the last two after getting fired from Renault. And then Olivier Panis, who was the driver, sat out the finale at Brazil. He retired that year. And so if memory serves me correct, 03 couldn't really split a whole lot between Panis and De Mada. They're kind of, as far as just strength on track, they were about equal. 04, I'd give the edge to De Mada. But unfortunately, once he got fired, Zonta actually did very well at both Belgium and China, considering what that team was as far as pace that year. They weren't very good. So, yeah, I mean, this is a case where if I'm De Mada and Toyota asks me to go race for their team, absolutely. It's one of the most well-funded teams on the grid. Everything should have pointed to them succeeding, and it just never did. And I think that's down to management. I don't think it was a driver issue at all. They had so many different combinations of drivers over the years, and some worked and some were a little slower. But at the end of the day, I think it was just a horribly mismanaged team. So it's another one of those situations where had De Mada gone into this team and they had known what they were doing, I think it would have obviously worked a lot better. It just unfortunately never panned out. And if he did get fired for speaking out, it's not like he was going places with them after a year and a half. It didn't look like it was going to pan out. So that's another tough one. And then obviously he came back to America and had that tragic accident at Road America. So it kind of went downhill once he went to Toyota, and it's kind of one of those unfortunate stories for sure.
I always wonder how his career would have played out differently if he stayed in Indycar, because he was, so good. Yeah, he had that rough accident. All right, where do we want to go next? We have two more listed here. Our buddy JPM and Jacques Villeneuve, both probably among the more successful to make the IndyCar to F1 switch.
Yeah, I think my hot take of the evening is that Juan Pablo Montoya. Okay, I mean, obviously, we got like Ayrton Senna, Michael Schumacher. We got like the greats who are amazing to watch and whatnot. But I think out of all the drivers I've ever watched in Formula One, I think Juan Pablo Montoya is probably the most exciting I've ever seen. And it was his utter disregard for like the system. Like, you're supposed to be like a nice boy and whatnot in Formula One. And he like just didn't care. He showed up in a Williams and like immediately was just full sending it on Schumacher, which is just not something you do. Everybody knows you don't mess with Schumacher on the track because he's, the god out there. And Montoya just didn't care, which is how it should be, in my opinion. So yeah, he comes over from kart after a championship and then a rough 2000 year with, Ganassi switching up a lot of things behind the scenes. But he did win the Indy 500 in IRL that year. And then goes to Formula One Williams and then later McLaren. And I think ultimately the downfall of Juan Montoya was Juan Montoya. I mean, his teams could give him good enough equipment to contend for wins, but not championships. And ultimately, 03, he was actually pretty close to a championship. But at the end of the day, I just don't. I think he just didn't care towards the end. Like he could just not care less. People work their whole lives to get to Formula One, and they guys put their lives on the line to try to stay in the sport year in and year out, and it kind of got to the point where he could just care less. To the point where he's announcing his NASCAR deal in the middle of the season, and Ron Dennis is like, well, all right, if you're going to do that, then we don't need you anymore. So he literally announced his NASCAR deal in the middle of the season. I think it was the race after, and Indianapolis was his last race where he hit Raikkonen that started like an 8-car accident in turn 1. So yeah, I mean, he was a phenomenal driver. He definitely succeeded in Formula One, in my opinion. Maybe he didn't achieve his ultimate goal, but he is still a success story. And I thoroughly enjoyed watching him race.
Yeah, I think Alex Rossi put up the best couple months ago on his show with James Hinchcliffe, where he said the man can literally eat like 3 cheeseburgers and 6 pounds of greasy French fries, get in a car and still whoop your ass because he's just that good at everything he drives. And his worst F1 season points wise was still 8th overall. And that was the year he only did 10 races because he got fired. So he had a 6th overall and then all top 5 finishes in the points after that with Williams and the 1 year with McLaren before McLaren fired him next year. So hard to call him anything. Hard to call his Formula One career anything but successful. Wins, poles, fastest laps, pretty much did it all over there except a championship. Which leads us to Jacques Villeneuve. I'm always fascinated by Jacques Villeneuve, and I have no idea why. Maybe just because, like, if there's one other guy in the world that's raced, like, every car that has an engine in it, it's Villeneuve. And he had a great run in 95. He won the IndyCar championship with Team Green. 96, he went to Williams in F1, finished 2nd. 97, Williams, he finished 1st. And then it was really downhill. I think that's probably when Williams started to get bad because he went from 5th in points to 21st with no points. And then Honda in the early 2000s was a disaster scene.
I mean, he timed it perfectly. He's the case study on he's got a little bit of the, his famous last name that definitely helps in that side with Gilles Villeneuve, who was a legendary Ferrari driver. So, that definitely helps. And he timed it perfectly. It came to Williams in one of their best seasons. Right up there with the Mansell PK season or the Mansell Patrese season. They were just a phenomenal team. And he comes over, takes over the seat from David Coulthard, and he does a phenomenal job. Competes with Damon Hill that first year in 96. Doesn't win the championship, but definitely establishes himself as a threat. And, well, for a lot of political reasons, Damon Hill was not in that seat for the next season. And in comes Heinz Franson, but Villeneuve, trounced him that whole year. I honestly think it's kind of weird. I think he was actually stronger in 96, even though he won the championship in 97. Schumacher had a really good year in 97, but ultimately did not win the championship. And there was that whole thing in Jerez that was quite controversial. And then after that, yeah, Williams 98, there was a lot of regulations changes. There was new tires, and that was, Mike's right. 97, that was it for Williams. That's kind of like their peak, and they've come close a couple times, like the Montoya era. They came close a couple times. 2014 and 15, they were well above average with their equipment. But 97 was kind of their last hurrah, and it's been all downhill ever since. So he got it right, but then 98, they were just not fast. And then he switched to BAR, which is a new team in 99, 2000, and I believe 01 and 02. And then he took a year off, and then it was Sauber. This is all off memory.
He was with BAR. 03, he was with BAR. 04, he was with Renault.
He did Renault with, I think he replaced Trulli after he got fired for 3 races.
Yeah.
And then it was Sauber, and then he got fired from Sauber, I think. So, yeah, I mean, black and white, yes, he won a championship. But if we're taking a step back, like, he had the best equipment for 2 seasons in a row. So it's kind of like, if you get 2 seasons the best equipment, first season, you're learning the ropes and whatnot. But that second season, you should do it. And so he did. So good for him.
Do you think if Juan Montoya was in the same exact equipment, he would also have won the championship that year?
I think, and I'm just looking at our list here. If you put Bourdais in that car, if you put Montoya in that car, if you put Danny Sullivan in that car, and if you put Michael Andretti in that car, they all win that championship in '97. I would argue that because I'm another rant. I'm not the biggest Damon Hill fan. I think Bourdais, JPM, and Andretti would have beat Damon Hill in '96 because I would rate a bunch of these guys ahead of Jacques Villeneuve. He was fast, don't get me wrong, but I don't think he is like elite per se. Just kind of over the whole course of his career. So yes, I think JPM for sure would have won a championship in '96 or '97 had the roles been reversed. Versus if Villeneuve was with Williams in 2001, do I think he would have won a race? 25% chance maybe. So yeah, it's one of those things where I caution people like, yes, Villeneuve did well, but it was when the peak Williams time, and that's right. Then they lost Adrian Newey, and it kind of all went downhill. So yeah, that one's tough for sure. And then the rest of his career was kind of just he was with BAR trying to develop him, and then kind of just wrote out his career at Sauber before getting fired. So, and then Robert Kubica replaced him, and that was a great success story.
And both of them are still, well, Kubica again is racing, and Villeneuve is still racing. At least
What's he doing?
He did the NASCAR Euro Whelen Series Championship. He did Formula E. He's done NASCAR. He's done the Xfinity Series. He's done like these weird, he did the Brazilian stock car series. He's done literally every series you can think of. He's at least entered one or two races.
Did another Indy 500.
Did another Indy 514.
Yes. Dollar General.
Yes.
So yeah, I guess if we're looking at it, yes, Villeneuve was quote unquote the most successful, but I think what we can conclude here is the best to go from IndyCar to Formula One was Juan Pablo Montoya. I think that's a fair statement there.
Cool. Well, we'll wrap it up there, guys. Hope you enjoyed a look at some of the drivers who have crossed series over the years. Obviously, all right, let's end it with one more question. I'm going to put you on the spot. Not worrying about age or money or anything like that. What's one IndyCar driver you would like to see enter F1? And don't worry about what kind of equipment they're going into, nothing like that. Just pure in the F1 series.
Yeah, I think there are definitely a couple of guys to pick from. The first one that really comes to mind would be Joseph Newgarden. Obviously, he's an immensely talented driver, and he's tried to get to Formula One. He also is really good at the whole politicking when it comes to when his contract is up. Like when he signed with Penske, he was also looking at like NASCAR and Formula One, and he just did like a really good job at it. He just didn't know what he was going to do, but he was keeping his options open. So I think Newgarden could do well. I think the only other one that really pops out at me would be Colton Herta. I think Colton could do. I mean, his road course craft in IndyCar is spectacular. I'm not. If there's anybody right now who I say like they're going to be in Formula One day, it's Colton Herta, which pains me because obviously he's a great asset for IndyCar, but he's really good, and I know you said to ignore all the intangibles, but he is super young, so he's definitely got a lot of years ahead of him. So I think he can make it work in Formula One. So those would be the two that I would have on my radar for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Those are the clear-cut favorite two. The only thing I have to add to that, since you literally took both of my potential answers, is I would like to see Alex Rossi get another shot at it in better equipment. Obviously, he was
Caterham and Manor.
Yeah, thank you, Manor. Not good equipment, and I wouldn't mind seeing, because he's been so good so far in all the Australian series, seeing Scott McLaughlin go F1. I think he would probably be pretty good at it. He looks like he's good at everything he does. So I'm going to throw that one out there as the completely out of left field answer. And now we'll wrap it up. Hope you enjoyed everything, guys. I hope you enjoy our hopeful episode this week with William Story himself. Keep your fingers crossed for us that it goes through, and we will be back next week, hopefully with some news and stuff to talk about. It's getting a little quiet right now, but everybody have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Today's podcast is presented by Podgo. Podgo is the easiest way for you to monetize your podcast, providing podcasters with a flat rate for ad space so you always know how much you get when you include an ad from Podgo. I recently joined as a member, and you can too. Apply today to become a member and immediately be connected with advertisers that fit your audience. That's podgo.co at podgo.co.